Okay, welcome to our discussion of philosophy of religion. We're going to be discussing the three great problems of philosophy of religion in this material. We're going to discuss what is religion, how can you tell a religion when you see one. We're going to discuss God, what is the nature of God, is there more than one God, is there no God at all? These are questions we're going to examine. We have the problem of the afterlife. We need to know what is our future, and in looking at philosophy of religion, we're looking at exactly this kind of thing. Now, let's begin by trying to define religion. Religion, I suggest, is any collection of ideas which tie a group of people together and their approach to dealing with the supernatural. By the supernatural, I mean the sorts of things which go beyond our normal, everyday, scientific discussion of reality. We're going to distinguish that from things like abstractions and generalizations and universals, because again, these things are meant to be seen as either intrinsic to the construction of nature, in the case of universals, or derived from nature, as in the case of generalizations. So while those things seem to be beyond nature, they really aren't. They're either an integral part of it or derived from it. When we talk about the gods, you remember I mentioned what Epicurus said about the gods. Remember, he said that the gods were too busy with their own lives to be worried about us. That's the sort of thing we're talking about, something beyond the universe that isn't tied to our usual understanding of cause and effect, that isn't tied to any kind of reality that you and I are tied to. They transcend it, they go beyond it, and that's why we say supernatural, above the natural. Now, so that's some idea of religion. I also mentioned religion as tying people together. If there's any meaningful distinction between being spiritual and being religious, and mind you, I'm not sure that there is any distinction, but if there is a distinction between the two, that's where it lies. The person who says I'm spiritual but not religious is claiming to have belonged to no particular tradition, not be attached to any particular school of thought. And that I'm not going to call religious. Call it spiritual. I'm just going to say it's personally, I think it's just probably lazy, but that's neither here nor there. The important part is religion ties people together. The very root of the word religion, ligare, means to tie together. So bear that in mind as we go forward. So there's a definition of religion. Got to have these definitions in place before you can do any meaningful discussion. Okay, so religion deals with the supernatural. Some of the things that are supernatural would be the afterlife, heaven, hell, or even something that's neither of the two, because we're going beyond our natural life. In our natural life, we die. It's just a done deal. That's just how life is. We die. Not even open to discussion. But we talk about an afterlife because that's beyond this life. We pass on to the next life, however you want to look at it. We're talking about something beyond mere natural existence, supernatural. But the big thing we tend to talk about as supernatural is God or the gods. When we're talking about the gods, even when we're talking about God, I think we're talking about the kind of being. It's essentially a personal thing. It has a will, has some sense of desires, and that's that kind of God or gods. We talk about as being worthy of worship, that it is worth our time to pay attention to these beings, to offer them some kind of allegiance or goods that we're able to change our situation in the world by calling on these people, and they will look out for us. Now, usually, you look at a division, the kinds of approaches to gods. You have monotheism, where there is just one God, and you have polytheism, where there are many gods. Now, where there are many gods, usually none of them are understood to be almighty. They're all understood to be perhaps on a scale of power. There may be a most powerful, but it is not the case in any theological tradition that I'm familiar with off the top of my head, that there is not some way of going beyond the power of Zeus or Odin. Now, it is true, I think it's safe to say, that the Brahma may not fit in here. We may see the force of the Atman extending above everything in Hinduism, but even still, all the other beings are lesser. They can be ranked on a scale. And again, the Atman isn't so much to be worshipped as it is to be joined with. So keep that in mind. So polytheism, monotheism. Monotheism, as I say, tends to see this idea that there is one God. Well, that's what monotheism means. That this God is all good, all powerful, and all knowing. We usually refer to that as omnipotent, all powerful, omniscient, all knowing, and benevolent, looking to do good for us. Interestingly enough, Mark Twain said, while we had no evidence for that God, we have plenty of evidence for one that was omnipotent, omniscient, and intends evil to us. And he offers as his primary example the mosquito. So there are some divisions in gods: monotheism, polytheism. Here's another division we look at in terms of our relationships with God. Just how extensive is our relationship with God? The traditional view of theism is that there are two kinds of thing. There is the God, the divine, and there is the not God, you and me. And we spend our time trying to placate or ingratiate or somehow or other get involved in this practice of worship with the God, the deity. So there's a division. Two kinds of things: gods, people. Sometimes people get to cross the line. Traditionally, for example, Hercules is seen to have been a human who becomes a god. So that's one idea of God and man and their relationship. Two distinct kinds of things. Now, the atheist says there's only one kind of thing. And the one kind of thing that there is man. The God thing is all in people's heads. There is no thing separate called God. It's just something you or your neighbor or your parents or me has dreamed up, and it isn't real at all. Now, on the other end of the scale, you have pantheism. Pantheism says everything is God. This, for example, is the position of Baruch Spinoza, a philosopher of the 17th century. Likewise, we see this in the writing of Robert Heinlein in, for example, Stranger in a Strange Land, but in many of his other works as well. This idea that we really are all God. Everything is God. Thou art God. And the theist looks at these two positions and really doesn't distinguish between them. He takes them both to be out of order, both to be wrong, and really both to be identical, because both are denying that division between God and man. The theist takes this division to be essential, and the whole purpose of religion is to break through that barrier between us. For the atheist to say there's nothing at all on the other side of the barrier, and that's why there's no barrier, bothers the theist. For the pantheist who says, no, there's no barrier there at all, God and man are perfectly joined, seems just as heretical and just as wrong. And the theist, tends to conflate the two, run them together, and just condemn them both with exactly the same language. So there's that about God. The other thing I guess we'll want to take a quick look at, okay, many gods are one God, the relationship between man and God, and then we would want to consider the possibility that some religions don't seem to need God in them. And we'll see that in Wang Chung, who will offer us an essentially atheistic view of Chinese traditional religion. There are schools of Buddhism. In fact, the Buddha himself is usually thought of as an atheist thinker. So you have Buddhism without God, and then you have some schools of Hinduism that suggest there is no such thing as a God, a thing worthy of worship, separate power higher and above our own universe that we live in. But each of these traditions that we've talked about will continue to see forces in the universe, maybe demons, maybe an afterlife, aspects to the universe that transcend, or aspects to human experience that transcend the universe, that go beyond the tools of science. And so these are the kinds of things we're going to be looking at.